The winter 2024 anime season actually turned out to be one of my busiest yet when it comes to sitting in bed watching cartoons. But even with a whole host of shows managing solid 7 out of 10s and a record low seasonal drop rate, one dark horse contender came from behind to establish itself as the pretty goodest show of them all. I had actually forgotten about the Unwanted Undead Adventurer, only reminded last second by its runner-up placement in a Mother's Basement season roundup.
One of them not quite isekai RPG light novel deals.
There are always a couple shows like this, small twists on the fantasy or isekai genre with equally small budgets, and they're almost invariably teetering on the brink of not being worth the time they take to watch. Still, I was bored, and the only alternative was a third straight episode of the Hokkaido Tourism Lobby's most creative ad campaign yet, though that one does get props for cobbling together a surprisingly advanced gamer goth waifu from spare parts. Have the Japanese been calling corn dogs French dogs this entire time? They don't even have corn in France. I mean, come on, it's amalgamated meats, corn, sugar, fried. This is as American as it gets! An hour and a half later, plus some small breaks, I closed this show's 4th episode feeling a sentiment toward it I can only describe as, yeah, very nice, actually. This isn't a video where I can pitch you on the secret 10 out of 10 instant classic you won't believe nobody's talking about. The only reason I can justify the superlative title is because Undead Adventurer really has no right to be jostling for 3rd or 4th place this season. Yet, collecting my thoughts after that 4th episode, I realized that the show was managing an almost impossibly not mediocre 313 on the wee bash shit scale. The first episode really does seem a lot like your standard fantasy slop, complete with an immediately undone time skip that screams a lack of confidence and a 3D animated main character because the budget was not going to cover drawing that many ribs. Yet there was enough here to keep me watching for another episode, little hints of self-awareness, grounded details you wouldn't find in thoughtless My Anime List fodder, a dash of surprising engagement with fight choreography. And as the show went on, I found myself surprisingly invested. It turned out to be using a really original setup I can only describe as a kind of inversion of standard dramatic irony. Quick and dirty definition, dramatic irony is when the audience knows something the characters don't, generating tension and engagement. It's common in horror media. When a killer is sneaking up behind some co-ed on her cell phone, that's dramatic irony. Here in Undead Adventurer, there's a twist and some layers to it. The simple inversion is the most common, where we know that this looming ghoul is sentient and nice, but Adventurer Girl here sure as hell doesn't and is threatening him with a knife. Later on, we get the dramatic irony double reach around, where this dumbass meets the world's most suspicious man in a dungeon and follows him to the tight crevasse, at which point the man says, yes, the treasure is just up ahead. And Monsieur Head Empty here complies immediately. The situation is fine. We as the audience know it's fine. The designated victim thinks it's fine, but it really, really shouldn't be, and that's weirdly engaging somehow. Playing this same thing in the same way over and over again would get boring really fast, but Undead Adventurer isn't a comedy and keeps the audience on its toes with some actual emotional involvement and more serious questions about whether Rent is really still himself and what it means to be a hero. It's a nice mix with those little grounded tidbits I mentioned earlier, challenges that would almost be domestic if the tone wasn't played seriously. How are they going to get past this guard post with his old passport? Rent needs a new sword but doesn't want to be recognized. He needs work, but using his old identity at the guild will raise some questions. The stakes aren't world-shattering, but they're treated seriously by the characters, and so the audience treats them seriously too. This is impossibly competent storytelling for a show with this premise and this production value. Of all the shows to understand that you don't need an Avengers-level threat to keep audiences engaged, this should not be one of them, yet here we are. The writing is often, say it with me, surprisingly competent. Intelligent characters make intelligent but not unrealistic deductions, which is hugely refreshing. Not all characters are smart, but the ones who are can make logical leaps, like this mysterious masked swordsman who can use all 3 magic types as staying with Lorraine, the best friend of the only other person I know like that, who coincidentally went missing a couple days ago. It's probably the same guy or in some way related. The main character is a man of middling intelligence, meaning that when the audience thinks of more creative solutions, like, well, if I couldn't talk well in a situation, I might try writing things down, they feel smart instead of thinking it's a plot hole. There's a tremendous amount of narrative generosity that can be earned when a story is believably driven by its characters and not the other way around. This is a show that very rarely tests your suspension of disbelief. All those little things that crop up in a normal anime. Why did they draw all these police officers smiling neutrally upon finding a girl's corpse? Why is this supposedly homicidal magical girl just letting her ostensible victims have a fun chat? Why is the main character slowly but surely acquiring a crowd of high school girls that are all in love with him?
Oh, and we have a penalty flag thrown.
That kind of stuff by and large just isn't in Undead Adventurer. The common advice is turn your brain off, but any fellow brain havers out there will know that that's not how it works. Undead Adventurer is an actual turn your brain off show, one that, for at least the episodes out thus far, doesn't prompt those questions you have to work to ignore in the first place.
That's not to say there's nothing like this. I mean, I do not understand the transition between these two episodes. It's we end the last one with her sleeping on the couch as Rent comes inside, and then at the beginning of the next episode, it's like, oh, I sure hope nothing bad happened to my good friend Rent. Oh, there he is. Time to pretend to be asleep. What is going on? What is happening here?
I find myself really struggling to find comparable media I can use as a common reference point for this show. The character-driven narrative and realistic decisions almost remind me of the web serial Worm, an unimaginably complimentary comparison for a show that looks like this. It's just that rare to run into media that does this believably. Tucker and Dale vs. Evil is the only example I could think of doing this kind of reverse dramatic irony. It's a good movie about a pair of well-meaning hillbillies subjected to the worst vacation of their life as this group of college students repeatedly kill themselves off through a combination of prejudice, paranoia, and really bad luck.
This is a suicide pact. These kids are coming out here and they're killing themselves all over the woods.
Oh my god, that makes so much sense.
Konosuba? It's not nearly on that level of comedy and doesn't try to be, but the daily life of adventurers is still there, and it has a level of authenticity I really don't find in stuff like cheat skill cooking in another world. I'm reminded of the writing of Diana Wynn Jones. You'd probably best know her work Howl's Moving Castle, but I'm also fond of some entries in the Chronicles of Crestamanchi series. She often makes a plot point out of everyone knowing your problems and wanting to help, but keeping quiet out of politeness. It's uncommon, but it's found here as well, and there's some overlap in the mundane framing of eventful lives in fantasy settings. Even outside of that direct plot point, similar themes appear in other ways. Rent thinks of himself as just another low-rank adventurer, but his helpful attitude and volunteerism make him a bigger deal than he thinks in his community, which strikes a similar chord of a situation being better than our point-of-view character thinks. There are several interesting contrasts with Solo Leveling, the other show this season about a weak adventurer in a world of set-from-birth power levels, dying to powerful bad luck and becoming the only human that can increase their stats by killing monsters.
Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Solo Leveling stars a weak guy handed the strength to be the main character of his setting. Undead Adventurer seems to be teeing up a story about how Rent was already impactful, not because he was a mithril-class badass, but because he was a good person who helped others as best he could. Solo Leveling is, let's face it, kinda 2010s edgy. But Undead Adventurer takes a lot of the same material and frames it matter-of-factly. Solo Leveling dismembers its monsters because it's a gritty, realistic show for grown-ups. Undead Adventurer dismembers its monsters because that's what swords do to meat, and the camera emphasis suggests it's more because the animators drew two objects here instead of one and want you to appreciate the work they did. They're both power fantasies in setup, but Solo Leveling plays it as straightforward wish fulfillment, where this wimp becomes Superman with no downsides and shows up everyone that looked down on him. After one dungeon, he's immediately killing train-sized serpents with his bare hands and accidentally dispatching walking apartment blocks with a single strike. I shouldn't be so hard on Solo Leveling. I'm sitting there right with you guys enjoying it too. There's nothing inherently wrong with wish fulfillment power fantasies, especially one so anti-hierarchical coming from a society like South Korea. Is it a bit cringe? Sure, but in the words of renowned sage Marin Kitagawa, kill not that which is cringe. Kill that which within you cringes. Ren's transformation also quickly makes him stronger than he ever was in life, and here he is killing a big monster, but his focus, and thus the show's, isn't really on how much of a badass he is. After several episodes of effort, he's achieved the power of a middling, albeit flexible, adventurer, and is frankly more worried about getting a humanish body back, which, yeah, that's what I'd be worried about too. Solo Leveling is pretty clearly setting up its transformation to be a giant systemic and social upheaval. The FBI is already here, but if Rent revolutionizes anything, it's likely to be through the insights a sentient monster can give into monster biology and magical evolution. Undead Adventurer is just a nice, surprisingly novel, self-contained story that punches way above its narrative weight class to achieve the heights of, hey, that was pretty good actually. I wouldn't call it a cozy anime like Cooking in Another World or Reincarnated to Pet All the Dogs. It's kind of a serious shonen fan's cozy anime, if that makes sense. This is a world where people look out for each other. Too often, anime trying to be realistic overshoot and make their world ironically alien since absolutely everyone's an antisocial jackass 100% of the time. On the cozy to grimdark fantasy spectrum, it's sitting in a place that's largely unoccupied, right below Grimgar, but not yet crossing into the outright cozy side. And hey, look, there's Frieren. Maybe that's why I keep bumping into her when I think about how this show feels, despite the two having very little common ground. I doubt it's for everyone. Maybe this particular setup of serious but low-stakes domestic fantasy is just weirdly engaging for me in particular. It's not a masterclass like Frieren. This scene in episode 5, for example, just doesn't have the production value to sell that he's in mortal peril from a random unknown threat, and his sudden reversal of fortune feels unearned as a result. Regardless, this show has heart to spare, and a quality of writing that shines through any of its production limitations. Don't let this one slip by if it seems interesting. Give it a shot, and by episode 3 you'll have a sense of whether it's a good fit for you.